the space shuttle descended down to the ground of the island. The dust and sand from below whipped around the ship as the engines scorched the ground that was below it. Although almost none of them had ever seen the island in their lifetime, the place was nearly unrecognizable from what the people had seen from previous pictures and descriptions of the island. The grass that once grew everywhere was sparse, and the massive city was almost completely demolished. The island was left completely abandoned, and it was now time for the people of Sionis to bring back the thriving civilization the island once had. It was their turn to keep the fire of the Zephian legacy alight. The shuttle that descended to the planet was equipped with the essentials for bringing back a civilization. These materials would serve the basis of the new cities of Zephyr. Construction began almost right away after landing on the island. Years and years of development were ahead for the people. Determination would have to drive them through the gargantuan project, but it would be worth all the effort in the long run. "95 years later, almost an entire century of construction and developments, the island has now become a utopia once again. The cities were now improved thanks to the immense power of Cyanium. The southern city, Meridionally, is the largest and most populated city on the island, followed by its close second, Septentrionalis, located in the north. Desert cities and outposts were developed around the sandy areas of the island. These cities include Nos Arenisum in the east, Nos Ora in the northwest, and then the smaller unnamed outpost on the far western shore. Suddenly, all power flickered and shut off. Windows shattered across the cities as a massive shockwave bursted around the island. In the sky, the people saw a gargantuan mothership above them in the orbit of the planet. The ship was the size of an entire planet, yet its gravity was not affecting anything strangely. The scientists on the island went to their observatories to take a closer look and investigate what truly was happening. The mothership had entered near them through a massive red portal. The portal had dark red energy flicking around it. Just then, another being followed the mothership through the portal. His infamous purple body could be recognized by anyone who knew what history their ancestors went through. He had returned, the conqueror and god of the Treq dimension, Zeroy. Zeroy leaves the Trough dimension after eradicating the Kradons. He travels to the Treq dimension, that he now was the god of. Here, he dedicates to pursue his newfound godly rank over the dimension by conquering many worlds and making his name well known across the universe. Zeroy successfully conquers 100 worlds, enslaving the people of the worlds to generate energy for Zeroy's body, providing a virtually endless supply of power for Zeroy. Zeroy continues his search for worlds to conquer when he encounters a massive alien mothership. The ship was the size of a planet, or perhaps it was a planet. Regardless, the mothership had strange properties to it. Zeroy had detected its energy signature light years away, meaning wherever this ship's energy was coming from, it was an energy unlike he has ever seen before. Along with this, the ship seemed to have no gravitational effect on any of its surroundings, unlike what an actual planet would act like. There were two figures that ran the ship. Their names were Blagunsky and Zabumsky. Blagunsky and Zabumsky had sent off their civilizations within simulation ships to find a better world long ago. But ever since then, they have tried to save the planet of Azarkina from pollution by transforming the entire planet into one gargantuan mothership. This massive project proved successful, and Blagunsky and Zabumsky were able to rig the planet's gravitational pull to only be in effect with anything within 25 miles of it. With the mothership fully powered on phasium energy, Blagunsky and Zabumsky traveled the universe. They contacted Zeroy, informing him that they were extremely intrigued by his immense power. They offered to make Zeroy even stronger than he was, but in exchange, they needed his vowed protection over the mothership. Zeroy accepts the offer and enters the ship. He is meted by Blagunsky and Zabumsky, who introduce him to the powers of phasium. Phasium was a red crystal native to the Treq dimension. This energy source was so rich in power that even just a small amount of it could power entire planets if used efficiently. Zeroy gathers a crystal chunk of phasium, having it inserted within the chest of his body. The power instantly grew throughout his body. The energy was more than Zeroy had ever felt before. The suit Zeroy wore began to break down from the sheer amount of power. To fix this, Zeroy had his body built to harness the energy of phasium more effectively, allowing him to distribute it however he pleases throughout his body. He then travels with the mothership to all 100 planets he conquered. Here, he uses his new power of phasium to demolish each and every world. This would allow Zeroy to throw himself into battle to find what was weak about his current body and replace it. After all 100 worlds were destroyed, Zeroy had officially become the absolute strongest and most fortified version of himself that he has ever been. Zeroy appeared mostly purple still, but had red bolts of energy bursting out where the phasium crystal was originally implemented. His cape was now accented with a dark red from the power of phasium. His left hand was entirely replaced with a claw, capable of firing beams of concentrated phasium energy. Several wounds from battle still showed, but only meant that Zeroy was stronger than he ever could imagine. Blagunsky and Zabumsky noticed their radar detecting an anomaly on a nearby planet. It showed signs of residual interdimensional energy, something that was familiar to Zeroy. The mothership and Zeroy descend to the anomaly on the planet. There was a massive crater right where the remains of the island rested. In the center of the crater was a weak spot in the dimension's fabric suspended above the ground. Blagunsky and Zabumsky found an ancient crashed spaceship sunken below the water nearby. They realized that the ship was one of their simulation ships that they sent their old civilization on so long ago. If this civilization was still alive, they could only be on the other side of that interdimensional weak spot between Treq and Trough. Zeroy looked on the ground near the interdimensional weak spot. He saw something red glimmering on the dirt below. He reached down and pinched it between his fingers. It could only be one thing: phasium crystal dust. The object that traveled dimensions here left phasium dust behind as it traveled. If the old civilization here had access to phasium on this planet, what could be found on the other dimension version of this planet? If there is an alternate dimension version of everything, there must be an alternate counterpart of phasium. This counterpart to phasium could be combined with phasium to create a power source stronger than any dimension could even create. Zeroy had a new goal. The Trough version of this planet had been hiding something he should have had for centuries now. Zeroy started to rip open a portal to the Trough dimension. The mothership stayed still as it orbited Zephyr. Zeroy started to charge faster and faster towards the moon, Sionis. Zeroy crashed through the massive energy field, striking the ground of the moon. He got up slowly, looking at the moon bases around him. Zeroy seemed concerned with the presence of life on the moon. Could it be that those he made perish so long ago survived? He shook off the thought, quickly turning and walking towards the massive deposit of cyanium. His intentions became clear now. He had come for this dimension's cyanium, and lots of it too. Zeroy reached the cyanium ore and instantly started ravaging and harvesting chunks of it. Zeroy seemed entranced by the cyanium, like he had been craving its power for centuries. The ground shook. Zeroy looked around, holding chunks of cyanium in each hand still. Abruptly, a being bursted through the ground below Zeroy, smashing his face with his fist as he flew up out of the ground. Zeroy was knocked off his feet for a moment, but he swiftly recovered. The being stood in front of Zeroy, standing at the same height and size as him. The being was known as Cyan-C, god of the Trough dimension and guardian of cyanium. Cyan-C was livid at Zeroy. Why would he travel to this dimension just to take cyanium for himself? Cyan-C had been protecting and keeping the power of cyanium from falling into the wrong hands, but never once has he ever had to deal with another god infiltrating his dimension to take cyanium. Whatever Zeroy's purpose for taking cyanium was, it could not be good. Cyan-C charges at Zeroy as he stands his ground. The two gods clash against one another for a few moments before Cyan-C swoops down to grab Zeroy's leg, launching him straight off the moon and towards the planet. Zeroy crashes right on the island of Zephyr. The immense phasium energy within him, paired with a brutal impact on the island, caused the surrounding environment to be scarred with the energy dispersed from the impact. He crawled up to see that the very land he had awoken on was where he was returned to. But there were cities across every bit of the island. He had failed in fulfilling Leroy's dying wish to extinct the Zephians. Zeroy was infuriated, but then soon enough, Science C followed. He crashed on the other side of the island, causing that area to be scarred from the energy of Cyanium. 3 larger chunks of the moon were brought down with him after the battle on the moon. The two gods had begun their battle against each other. One side of the island was corrupted with cyanium crystals. The other was corrupted with the Treq dimensional counterpart of it, phasium. The northern dunes were now completely taken over by Science's cyanium energy, while the eastern plains were entirely devoured by phasium energy from Zeroy. Science knows he's against someone extremely powerful, but cannot let any more lies fall into the hands of Zeroy. If Zeroy got a hold of cyanium, it could be the end of the Trough universe as we know it. Zeroy charges at Science, immediately clashing against him and punching haphazardly. Each punch was stronger than the last, and all were without much of a struggle for him. Science sent out a shockwave of cyanium energy, knocking Zeroy down. Science jumps into the air, only to come slamming down on Zeroy with a powerful kick. Zeroy throws Science off of him, sending him flying towards the city. Science quickly redirects and charges right back at Zeroy, punching him deep into the ground. Zeroy was shocked by Science's power. It was completely unlike anyone he's ever faced before, but he was still determined to make quick work out of him. Science was struggling to keep the fight in the north away from the people as they evacuated to the bunkers. But soon enough, everyone had fully evacuated. It was time to show Zeroy his all. Zeroy bursted out of the ground, flying just across from Science. A moment passed before Zeroy charged straight towards Science again. Science found Zeroy to be predictable in his movements. He would charge at him with a punch and attempt to slam him into the ground afterwards. Science easily dodged the punch Zeroy threw, grabbed his arm, and then flung him into the ground. Zeroy laid on the ground for a few seconds. Science waited. Suddenly, Zeroy launched back up towards Science. Science prepared to dodge out of his punch when Zeroy whizzed past him. Zeroy had not been charging at Science to punch him, but rather to fly above him. Science was thrown off. Was Zeroy being purposely predictable earlier just to trick him at this moment? Zeroy raised his left arm and aimed it at Science. A blast of solid phasium energy catapulted out of the cannon in his arm. Science was now the one being pummeled into the ground. The blast kept incinerating his body until it finally went out. Science was laying in the crater, slowly looking up to see Zeroy floating above him. Science had to get up and keep fighting. The fate of the whole dimension rested in his hands. The two battled on the island for days. Science would charge his punches with cyanium while Zeroy would blast beams of phasium energy. The island was decimated. Science was getting weaker by the moment. Zeroy was still moving strong. Science charges towards Zeroy once again. Zeroy stands there while Science throws punches after punches. Zeroy was hurting, but he knew Science was in much more pain than him. Science's punches grew slower and slower until he stopped. Zeroy reached in to grab Science to finish the job, but Science quickly dodged out of the way, instantly charging his fist with immense levels of cyanium energy before punching Zeroy in his back. Science was in pain, but he could keep going for days, weeks, maybe even months. Zeroy was thrashed into the ground. Science stood tall. Zeroy was buried under. A beam of phasium energy burned through the ground that Zeroy is under. He flew out of the hole, covered in blemishes. Science bolted towards Zeroy, but Zeroy flew towards him as well. An echoing boom was heard for miles. Science gasped, but no air could be breathed in. Zeroy's arm was punched straight through Science's chest. Zeroy slowly lowered his arm, and Science slowly slid off of it, falling onto the ground below. The blue light that shined in his skin faded fast. Zeroy looked down at the old god of the Trough dimension, and then headed for the now demolished cities. Zeroy had completely taken over the island, along with claiming the title as the new god of the Treq and Trough dimensions. Every survivor there was, whether on the island or inside the bunkers, perished at the hands of Zeroy. The only Zephians that survived this disaster were the ones that chose to be cryogenically frozen on the moon, Sionis. He vowed to eradicate all lives of Kraydon and Zephian kind, just as Leroy had wished for. Zeroy flew up and headed for the moon once more. Now that the Guardian of Cyanium was out of the way, nothing stood between Zeroy and the Cyanium he could harvest. Zeroy would finally create the ultimate power source for his body, becoming truly unstoppable. Zeroy was still furious over the fact that Zephian life survived from what he had put them through. All of that just for them to come back. He could not be satisfied with a mere extinction of their species this time. This time, Zeroy planned a new fate for the Zephian kind.